Joining me in the studio, Steve Hartshorn is the National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Steve, afternoon to you. Good to see you. Look, we will await more detail, of course. From what we know and what we heard Nick point to there, based on that, this seems like almost a textbook example of the police responding in the absolute correct way, establishing the facts, surveying the scene, realising where the threat was and acting on it.
It does, and it seems like it shows an escalation of use of force by unarmed colleagues turning up first to deal with what was probably a 999 call, a disturbance maybe in the street or in the house. Then it appears that they've been threatened by an individual. They then call for armed response support to support them in their needs. And then obviously things have escalated where my former colleagues have had to effectively enter a building and have taken what's called decisive action. They've obviously felt that immediate threat to life was so imminent they had no option but to use a firearm to deal with that threat, to neutralise any ongoing threat either to the occupants inside the house themselves or unarmed colleagues. So, it sounds like it's an effective operation to do with it, but obviously nobody wants anybody to die.
Of course, and which brings me to the next point. There are agitators out there, people who aren't fans of the police. I should say you're a trained firearms officer, so you know what it's like to hold a gun and have to attend scenes and situations where you may be required to use it. No officer with your level of training wakes up in the morning and says, what a great day to go and shoot somebody. This is done really as a last resort. It's done in response, emergency response to something. It doesn't just happen.
No, it's generally always reactive. Unless you happen to be driving around the streets of London or indeed any firearms officer in the country, if you see something happening, you have to deal with it. You have a fraction of amount of time to decide on your powers, your policy, your use of force, your backdrop, your foreground. Is it the right weapon you're using? Are there any members of the public nearby? The collateral intrusion that could happen if you don't do something there and then. If you delay, that might be just as bad as not doing anything or as taking action. So it's a very complex set of thoughts that go through an individual's mind when they're about to deploy, when they deploy. But of course, they'll now be thinking they'll actually be still going through what's called the post-incident process right now. I gather it happened at 5 o'clock this morning. That would have been a night duty team. They'll probably still be on duty going through those initial accounts to make sure that this independent investigation gets some very, very good, timely evidence from them to start with, and that will be followed up.
Yeah, indeed. And when the incidents themselves, when these happen and you attend a scene such as this, somebody's got a firearm, a knife, whatever it happens to be, and there is clear and obvious danger to others, whether it's the officers, members of the public, a family member, whatever it happens to be. What's the procedure then? Does an individual officer, there might be half a dozen officers pointing guns towards a house, is there a discussion in the ear that says, right, one of you has got to dispatch your firearm here, or does an individual simply take that decision in that moment?
No, it's every time a use of force by a firearms officer, it's an individual decision. You might have specific orders about where you are placed on that team, whether you go to the front of the premises, the rear, the side. You might be deployed as a long eye to maybe with a different rifle to get a long view into the building as officer approaching. But every single use of force is down to that individual person to decide in those particular circumstances, and they will, of course, have to justify that to any independent investigation which is now taking place.
Yeah. This won't come as a shock to you, Steve. There are some people out there who don't like the police. There are one or two pressure groups or interested parties that think that you guys are, a bunch of trigger-happy characters that go around almost like gangs, doing whatever you like. It's a complete urban myth. There's no demonstrable evidence for any of that. And in fact, the idea that we have a trigger-happy police force is just not borne out in any of the figures. I think there were 26,000 incidents last year, or times when officers had to attend armed. I think that could be taser as well as conventional firearms. Last year in London, one person was shot dead. That was a white person. I mention that only because race often does get loaded into this debate. I sense that as a bit of a distraction, but there are groups that do introduce that. Police fire guns reluctantly. They don't do it because they want to. It is not a trigger-happy police force, is it?
Absolutely.
The numbers compared to, you go to other countries, forget America and places like that, even other similar countries. I know we're not routinely armed in the UK, but even allowing for that, it's very rare for an officer to fire a gun.
Yeah, if you look at some of the Home Office own figures, in the year, it published in November last year, I think it's 369,973 uses of force recorded across England and Wales. of that a certain percentage, 0.02, are actually firearms discharges. The chances of firing are so small, it's very rare. That's why it makes big headlines.
Yeah.
However, there's a job to be done, and when that immediate threat is there, our very brave, courageous police officers and our firearms officers are prepared to step forward into danger. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what else these individuals have. They do the job of protecting the public, and they do it very, very well. So I understand people's concerns, but look at the evidence, look at the job they do, the training they get. And again, this is an independent investigation by the IOPC. It's not run internally. All the evidence will be given to them. They will run it. They will make their decisions, and then we'll go from there.
It's interesting, isn't it, that in a case such as this, officers are out there. There's a guy with a crossbow, that much we know. He's clearly posing some sort of threat. He's broken into a house. There's a distressed call to 999. I mean, those officers are facing a man with a crossbow, for goodness sake. You know, a crossbow is it's not a pea shooter. A crossbow will kill you. It's a very dangerous weapon, and if it didn't kill you, it would cause horrendous damage. What is an officer supposed to do in that situation? They're meant to go, look, I'm not going to carry a gun. I'm not going to do anything about this. I'll take the bullet. I'll take one for the team. I don't think so.
No, and it's interesting because every set of circumstances is different. The training they get is first rate. I'd say our firearms officers get the best training in the world. I'm naturally biased, but they do a really good job. And the main premise is to identify, locate, contain the premises or the person and neutralise the threat and by the safest means possible. But sometimes the public don't get that briefing. They don't understand that they're supposed to stand still when we tell them to stand still through either a concoction of drink, drugs, mental ill health, physical impairment. They're just not able to comply with what we would say very basic instructions, and that's no fault of theirs. Yeah. But we have to act to protect everybody, my colleagues, the public, anybody that comes into contact. We have to deal with that threat appropriately, and sometimes we have to pull the trigger. Yeah. It has to be done. It's to stop an ongoing harm to somebody else. Otherwise, this could have been a different process where we have other members of the public who've sadly been killed. Yeah,
and then people will be criticising the police for not acting.
Exactly.
You know, there were firearms officers there. You didn't do anything about it. For goodness' sake, there'll be that. Yeah. One of the things an officer who does have to use and fire a gun in a situation such as this, the one thing they could normally rely on is anonymity. You don't go around naming somebody in that respect. It's not necessary. There's no need for it, but it's ultimately quite dangerous for an officer to be identified. You know, there could be repercussions, etc. But there is a case, and we can't talk about the specifics of the Chris Carver case because that's ongoing. There's a murder charge against an officer on this. But in addition to the incident itself, what brought this to the news was that this officer is likely to be named. Previously given anonymity, the judge, I think, has now moved it to March when they might name this officer. It's caused real disquiet amongst your colleagues and former colleagues on this because a lot of officers think, well, why would I want to go into this? You know, I'm going into this world because, you know, it's difficult, it's challenging. But if I'm asked to actually literally do the full extent of my job, someone's going to name me?
Yeah, there's real genuine concern amongst firearms officers across the country, which I'm glad the sort of the Home Office and the previous Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, listened and launched what we call the accountability review. And that covered use of force, driving and other aspects of policing that our colleagues are very concerned about. And we understand we are always going to be accountable. This isn't about hiding what we do, when we do it, or indeed who we are. But for us, it's about the right point. And it would be it's good to see that the naming of the officer has been delayed a little bit because of ongoing cases. But officers have to realise at some point they could be named. It's just caused so much concern now. It might affect recruitment, retention across the country. Yeah. We're just now waiting to see what that accountability review will give. I expect there'll be some public consultation, and I'd encourage anybody to feed into that about their concerns. But the first time ever, we're starting to see officers actively perhaps not going into the firearms world or thinking about that not being their choice of job anymore, which is disappointing.
And it's voluntary, of course, isn't it? No one's compelled to become a firearms officer. The invite is there if you'd like to apply for this particular area of policing, then that's up to an individual. So, I mean, that in itself, not everybody, it will not be everybody's idea of what they want to do, and most officers don't take that up, but those that do it, in a considered, responsible manner. It's going to have an effect. These kind of stories will have an effect on recruitment, surely.
It does, and again, I think what's happening now with the post-incident process taking place, those officers involved will be thinking, is this going to be me? Will I be named in 12 months' time, 2 years' time? That's got to have an impact. Again, we're starting to see from some of the evidence that we provided ourselves to the accountability review, that officers are now thinking about the outcome of a particular case before they've actually done anything. that's dangerous in itself, because we want our colleagues to be focused 100% on protecting the public, their colleagues and themselves, as opposed to thinking about, if I shoot somebody and they die, what is going to be the outcome? Will I be charged for murder? We've never had it before, and I'm hoping that the government, with the accountability review, listens to all the evidence submitted by ourselves, the MPCC, public consultation, get to a place where my colleagues can have some certainty that there will be better protection in place to make sure that they get a fairer outcome.